Hey guys, it's Jessica.
And this is Kendra, and you're listening to Lucid Lab.
Kendra just saw my hair and she's like, what the heck happened to you?
It's so short.
I know. I'm so mad. I had this great plan of taking me and my daughter to go get our haircuts. And we went to the same lady that we had last time. And I don't think she'll listen to this, although I did suggest us to her. So I hope not. But it was botched. It was so much money. We're just so both upset. I just wanted to trim. I've had long hair my whole life.
Right.
I just get the dead ends taken off. And my hair's shorter than Kendra's right now. And it's kind of curled so she can't tell. But the layers, nothing matches up. It's not okay. But my daughter, she wanted bangs again, and I hate bangs, but you know, I'm like, all right, just be a little bit more carefree with her hair, let her do what she wants.
Right, when she can.
And she wanted like those curtain bangs, which are kind of long, and then they like
Sabrina Carpenter
cascade down the side or whatever. She did it in like 2 seconds. In the middle of her forehead, it like stops before her eyebrows. And then it is like really chopped on one side. The other side doesn't match. They're like these two really thin strands going down the side, and where we would have sideburns, it's like chopped. And she just cried for like an hour and a half when we got home. And I'm just like, oh my God, this was like a horrible experience. And we've been to her before, so I'm so confused. But
she was having an off day.
Yeah. So we're both like, well, that's hair. It's always a risk, right?
It's part of the female experience.
Yeah,
we always
right.
get one really bad haircut. I remember when I was like 6 or 7, my mom told them to cut off like a couple of inches. And somehow the lady heard that she wanted my hair a couple of inches. And I came out looking like a boy.
God.
Because I was like
Wow.
6 and had, like a pixie cut, essentially. It's what they gave me, which I guess was popular in the 80s at the time. And that's what they thought I wanted. And I went home bawling because I had long hair.
Oh, that sucks so much.
Yeah.
She must have chopped like 6 inches off my hair.
Yeah, a lot of your hair is gone.
Yeah.
Does your hair grow fast?
No.
Oh, shit.
No. So all of 2025, I will not be me. That kind of sucks. Because I'm used to my hair. I'm used to how I put my hair up in buns, how I braid my hair, how I do all of it. And now I'm just like, what do I do right now? I put my hair up in a little clip last night while I was cleaning, and all of it fit in the clip. That never happens. And there was just like this little thing sticking out the back. And I was like, oh my God.
So short.
Like I can't, like I was having an anxiety attack over it. And I was like, oh well. I have to move on.
I've been going to the same girl for 10 years. I'm like, if I trim it, it's just enough where I can still put it up. Because that's what I do around the house. Most of the time it's up in a bun and out of my way. Because I have really, really thick hair and it's really heavy. Like I can't do a ponytail because it gives me a headache because my hair is so heavy.
Oh.
You have thick hair too.
No, I don't. Mine's actually, maybe it's in the middle. It's definitely not thick. Me and my daughter both have similar kind of thinner hair. So certain things don't work for our hair. Like she wanted another hairstyle and I'm like, that's not going to work. It had like layers in the back and stuff. I'm like, your hair is really thin. It's going to look
choppy,
ridiculous. So I don't know. I wish I had a little bit thicker hair.
Yeah.
Because in order for my hair to look thick, I have to do a certain thing. Like when I get out of the shower, otherwise you'll see, like if I were to straighten it right now, it's like super thin.
Oh, wow.
But it just has volume because of how I treat my hair.
Okay. I just have really thick, almost like what curly hair would be.
Yeah.
My hair is heavy.
Yeah. Yours is like dog.
And I shed like a dog because I have so much hair. And I hope that, as I get older, I hope that stays because I don't want my hair to thin because I know that it's, but it does also take my hair like 3 hours to air dry and stuff. So there are like pros and cons. Anyways.
Anyway, enough about hair.
I'm sure y'all wanted that 5-minute diatribe.
Alrighty. Well, what are you covering today, Kendra?
Well, today, after we've taken kind of a short break from true crime.
Yeah, we have actually.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a very famous. I found out when I started researching it that there is quite a following, and it is the Keddie Cabin Murders.
I think the only reason why it's ringing a bell for me right now is because you've said it a bunch.
Right.
I don't think I know anything about this.
Well, it takes place in California, our favorite true crime location. I was joking with Drew because he was asking what I was doing my episode on. And I told him, and I was like, it happens in California, which I think I've decided 80% of true crime happens in California.
I know. It's crazy.
We always end up there, not even on purpose.
But like you said, it's a really big state.
It is a huge state. And there's something in the water. And we just did Winchester Mystery House.
Yep.
So we just end up back here. It is what it is. This case is an unsolved one.
Ooh.
Anytime there's an unsolved case, there's lots of Reddits about it, just like John Bonet. There's so many theories. A lot of people have opinions. So I'm going to try and do this case justice. You know, we try to keep an open mind. So I will present all the different facets that I found, and then we will kind of tell you what we think at the end. So,
and I will do my best to not jump ahead, because that's what I do every single time you do one of these episodes.
I keep ending up with all the unsolved ones.
I know.
And then you're, trying to guess the whole time. And I'm like, give me a minute. Hold that thought.
The other day I was going through our list and I was like, I cover a lot of female murderers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've done most of them. You did the Candy Montgomery, but I was trying to think of another one that you did. And I'm like, did I do all the females?
Maybe. I have one coming up in the calendar. But yeah,
it's hard, guys. We're at what, 93 episodes, 94 episodes? I don't know.
I think we're
getting
94.
up there.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember everything we've done.
We've done a lot. And if you're new to our podcast, you just found us, definitely go back and listen. We have a lot of really good ones.
Yep.
So, Keddie Cabin. In April of 1981, a mother, her teenage son, and her son's friend were found brutally murdered in their home, which was a cabin in Keddie, California. The fourth victim, her 12-year-old daughter, was taken from the cabin, and what happened to her would take years to discover.
So I'm guessing Keddie is Northern California?
Yes, we'll talk about Keddie here in a minute.
Okay.
So what we have is a quadruple homicide that has been unsolved since it happened in 1981. No one has ever been charged with the murders. But we'll talk about it because there were some very good suspects.
Okay.
But for reasons maybe known or unknown, they were never charged. This case is actually so famous that there was a horror movie made in 2017 based on the Keddie Cabin story, and it is called Cabin 28.
Ooh, have I seen that? I don't know. I just looked at the poster for it and I have not seen that.
I think like Cabin in the Woods is another one that people
Which I have
think of.
seen that one.
And I do feel like that one takes a little bit of inspiration from this story as well.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, anytime you're in a cabin, in a remote area, something happens, that's kind of scary. So,
which sucks because that's where I want to live someday.
I know. So it's been 45 years since the Keddie Cabin murders took place, and in many ways, it doesn't feel like it will ever be a closed case. Many accuse the Plumas County Sheriff's Office and the California Department of Justice, at the very least, of botching the investigation, and at most, covering up for those who they suspected were the perpetrators of the crime. So we got some conspiracy going on here too, which always makes for a good discussion. They are still looking for answers right now, looking at up to 6 people being involved in these homicides.
Oh, wow. Okay, so not one person, but multiple people.
Yeah. This is a very convoluted, complex story.
Okay.
Unfortunately, many of the suspects are no longer alive today, so even if they do find definitive evidence, it's going to be hard to see justice served here.
Right.
What really happened that April night in Cabin 28? Glenna Susan Davis, who went by Sue for most of her life, was born on March 29th, 1945 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Not much is known about her early life, but at some point she got married to a man named James Sharp, and they had 5 children together while living on the East Coast. John was in the Navy and apparently wasn't the greatest of husbands.
Okay.
There are rumors of infidelity and possible abuse.
So she went as far as she could to the other coast.
Exactly. So in 1979, at the age of 34, Sue Sharp packed up her belongings and all 5 of her children to leave James behind and move to the West Coast. The 5 children she had with her included her 13-year-old son, John, 12-year-old daughter, Sheila, 10-year-old daughter, Tina, and 2 younger sons, Rick, age 8, and Greg, age 3.
That's a lot of kids to have.
I know. It would come out in later times that Sheila, the 12-year-old, claimed her father was sexually abusive towards her. And at some point, James Sharp was convicted on sexual misconduct with a minor. So I'm thinking there probably was some scary things going down that prompted Sue to pick up her kids and get the hell out.
Yeah, and to get as far away as you can.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Especially considering she did not have money and she did not have any skills or training to support a family of 6 on her own. This was back in a time when many women still did not work outside of the home. So something was bad enough that she made this decision.
Brave mama.
Absolutely. They relocated to Northern California because Sue's brother, Don Davis, lived out there. Upon arriving in California, she rented a small trailer that her brother had formerly occupied. So she kind of had that in because he was moving out. And that was in the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy, California. It was a cramped living situation for a family of 6.
Oh, yeah.
At some point, her husband, James, did come out to visit and see where they were set up, but that was the one and only time he ever came to see his wife or kids.
That's crazy. You have 5 children. Yeah, I mean, she left you, but you walk away from them. That just tells you everything.
I wonder if he came out and she was like, why the hell are you here? Don't you ever come out?
I mean, I hope so. It could have been that bad where she's like, no, like you don't get to have any part of their life.
We know he did not pay any child support. So Sue was left to fend for herself, and she was taking odd jobs, doing whatever she could to pay the bills. They were extremely poor, and it was a difficult time for her and the kids. She applied for welfare and food stamps. It was reported that she was successful in a petition to the Navy for child support because he wasn't paying. She was able to get it taken directly from his paycheck.
Oh, wow.
I can't think of the word for that. Anyways, they take it directly from the paycheck each month, and that was only around $250. But in 1980, that would cover her rent and just basic necessities.
That's crazy. Rent and basic necessities.
I mean, they're in like a 2-bedroom trailer, so
still.
It's not, but yeah, I mean, you're not on the streets.
Yeah.
With $250 today, you can't do shit.
You know, when you're in a bad situation, I remember when I knew that me and my daughter needed a different situation. And, you know, I'm not saying that I went through anything like what she went through.
Right.
But when you're willing to start over and you know it's going to be better for you, you're willing to start over with nothing.
Yeah, so because it's better than staying.
I know she was happier regardless.
Now, there are some conflicting stories and opinions about Sue. But many of the interviews after the murders, people spoke poorly of Sue and said she was not a good mom.
Oh.
She was neglectful and she was never at home.
Well, if she's having to work,
I know.
Yeah, it's a little difficult.
Those living in the trailer park recalled that the kids were always wandering around alone, often underdressed and begging for food.
Oh, man.
Residents stated that when they would knock on the door of the trailer, finding one of those wayward kids to take back home, Sue was never there. But this was also a time when that was kind of accepted to leave your kids around, and no one really interfered. They just talked shit behind her back. So like CPS was never called in. Nobody reported anything.
Well, she had some older teenage kids, though.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Sheila here in a minute. Her oldest daughter was kind of acting as mom.
Yeah.
Others would say that Sue was a hardworking mom. She was just trying to make ends meet and doing what she could. This kind of reminds me of when I talked about Walter Collins and his mom having to work and leave him at home.
Yeah.
Because she was also a single mom and people went after her. She was the reason her son got kidnapped. And it's like, you can't win as a woman.
No.
Ever. So I'm sharing this, but I don't know that I necessarily believe Sue was this irresponsible woman. They paint her in a very bad way. From everything that I saw, but I did find some positives. And what I'm going to talk about here is that she was working any job she could to pay the bills. She was working as a dishwasher and a cook at the Quincy Elks Lodge. She was trying to better herself by taking classes at the nearby community college to gain skills like typewriting so she could become a secretary, get a better paying job.
Yeah, that does not scream neglectful mother to me at all.
No.
A neglectful mother who's not paying attention to her kids, I imagine, is like drinking or out at night and stuff like that. You wouldn't imagine if she was doing that, she would also have time to also go to school so that she could get a better paying job.
The people who say this about her say she was very shy and she was reserved. She was a loner. She only had like one close girlfriend in town, and the rest of the time she wasn't working. She was just at her trailer with her kids watching TV.
Because she has no time.
No.
What do you mean?
I know. I have a hard time sometimes reading books and articles because I do feel like women are always to blame for anything. Even our own murders.
Yeah,
our own fucking
murders. It does not
murders.
matter what it is. She could have been home all the time with them, not had the second job or whatever, and they're eating ramen every day, and she's going to be judged for that because she didn't have ambition to do better. It doesn't matter what.
Or she's living off the state. She's just taking food stamps and not trying. So just know I'm sharing this information, but I don't necessarily think it's fair.
Yeah.
And she's dead. We don't know.
I know.
She's going to be murdered. So we don't know her side of the story at all.
Yep.
So she was dating a couple of men in the area. One was named Daryl, but she didn't really have any serious relationships. I think it was just kind of something. She was very pretty in the pictures. I could see men being attracted. She was a new woman in the area. I'm sure she had plenty of offers. So the other side of the coin is people portray Sue as that irresponsible mom and that she was a party girl who spent her days hanging at friends' houses, smoking and drinking to escape the responsibility of being a single mom. One website even mentioned that the only reason she was taking classes at the community college is because at the time there was a government program that would pay money if you were trying to better yourself. It was a program called CETA, and several of her party friends were also enrolled in the classes with her. Those who want to paint her in this light said that she was only going there because she would get enough credit from going to the classes to get money from the state. Not sure which is true.
Yeah, and that would be in complete contradiction to what I just said before.
So I'm not sure which side of the coin is the true one, but either way, we know that it left the young children with no supervision by their mom, either because she was working all the time or she was partying.
Okay.
So that left Sheila. She was the oldest daughter. She was 12, and she stepped in to serve as that surrogate mother, and it was a role that she really resented. She was a young child after all, and that was really unfair for her. I saw some reports that she despised her younger siblings so much that she would lock them out of the trailer all day and spend time inside by herself, or sometimes letting her 10-year-old sister Tina stay in the trailer with her, and they would just watch TV all day and then finally let the younger kids back inside when it got dark.
Wow.
There was another family in Quincy, Nina and Richard Meeks, that had young children, and they would often be seen hanging out at the Sharps trailer. Nina was Sue's closest friend and, according to some reports, only friend because she was a loner. But some people said she was party girl, so I don't know which one it is. But
right. Yeah.
Either way, we know Nina Meeks was close with her. So it makes sense that the Meeks kids and Sue's kids would be hanging out. So from these reports, it sounds like the adults would all just hang out at the Meeks house all day, drinking, smoking, partying, whatever, and they would just send their kids over to Sue's house to just get them out of the way.
And then the 12-year-old is like, nope. And so they're all like locked out.
Exactly. It kind of feeds into the whole, I don't know, I hate to say this, but like the trailer trash that we hear here in America. I feel like when I was reading a lot of things on this case, people like to paint that picture of the Sharp family.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's fair or not.
There's a lot of
stigma.
Yeah, around anybody who lives in a trailer, unfortunately, in this country. And
it's stupid.
It's very stupid. Like, it's just so dumb because I have been friends with, dated, like tons of people who lived in trailers. I personally have never lived in a trailer, but they take care of their homes. They're hardworking people.
It's just a cheaper form of living.
Yes. And
I had many friends who lived in trailers growing up in Texas. I spent the night at their house and it was was what it was.
It's just a house inside.
I think my parents, when they first got married, lived in a trailer in Texas.
And now that's so funny you just said that because my mom said that we lived in a trailer for a few years when we lived in Texas.
Mm-hmm. It's very common there because it's, I guess, warmer climates are better for trailers. Like here in Colorado, it costs so much money to heat. Yeah. Something that's off the ground that even if your rent's cheaper, I think you pay like twice as much in utilities.
I mean,
it's
not cheap.
No.
I even once looked into what would it cost for me to get a trailer, and then you have to rent the space and like it's not a cheap thing to do.
I just know I liked visiting my friends in the trailer park. We always lived in houses, but I was always jealous of my friends in apartments and trailer parks because they had a pool. So it's all relative.
Very true.
So one day there was a barbecue that Sue Sharp would go to with Nina, and there she would meet a married man named Marty Smart. He was attending the barbecue that day without his wife, Marilyn.
I'm just thinking of 80s movies, Marty Smart.
I know, it doesn't even sound like a real name.
I know it doesn't. Candy.
Smarties. It's rumored, but no one can fully confirm, that this was the moment Sue and Marty sparked up a conversation that would eventually lead to an affair.
Okay.
So Marty and Marilyn Smart were an interesting couple. Marty had been in trouble several times for various crimes, some involving drugs. He was in and out of work and often had a hard time holding down a job. He was also Marilyn's second husband, and she had children, so he was their stepdad.
Okay.
But they didn't have any kids together.
So Marty wasn't smart.
Maybe not. It's an ironic name.
It really is. It's a lot to live up to, honestly, if you're born with that. And at some point you're like, fuck it.
So he came across a job working at the Keddie Lodge restaurant. It was an ad for a cook, and part of the compensation was to live rent-free at one of the cabins within the resort, and it would be cabin number 26.
That's a great deal.
Yes. And so Marty and Marilyn moved from Quincy down the road to Keddie. Before I move on much further, let me take a moment to describe this area of California.
Yes, please.
We are in Plumas County, which is northeast of Sacramento, and it's a heavily forested area. It's a very rural part of California. There's no real big cities there. Quincy serves as the county seat. The Lassen Volcanic National Park is on the northern border of Plumas County. That's not a very well-known national park. Total population for the entire county is only 20,000 residents. So it's a very small area, and it's kind of one of those places where everyone knows everyone.
Which is like where you want to live, but where you do not want to live.
Yeah, it's like a catch-22.
Definitely.
Most of the county runs on tourism to the Plumas Forest, where there are many lakes for fishing and boating, and there's a lot of mountain biking trails and hiking. The average income for residents living in Plumas County is well below the national average. And as of the last census, the largest town is East Quincy with about 2,000 people.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Very, very small.
Where Sue and her family lived in regular Quincy, there was only about 1,400 residents. And I had more than that in my high school in Texas.
Definitely. Me too.
That's a really small area.
Yeah.
Keddie was even more isolated and small-minded. Keddie was about 7 miles away from Quincy. It was less than a single square mile in size and only had 65 properties in the town, populated by about 153 people.
Yeah, definitely some judgment.
Very small.
That can go on there. Wow.
In the early 1980s, the Keddie area was home to a multitude of cabins, a restaurant, a hotel, and a bar. There was also a general store, post office, and a boarding house for Feather River Community College students. And I think most of the kids going to school there were learning like forestry, and so it made sense that they would stay in that area. It was also a railroad town.
Oh, okay.
It's a place where the tracks come together, and there's you have a lot of railroad employees that will be spending the night there.
Right.
So transient, I guess, in a way. But this one was also a part of the railroad that was like a pretty area, and many of the railroad employees would rent cabins or even own homes in Keddie. During the summer, it was busier because of the tourist traffic, and so many of those cabins would be rented out to tourists as well.
It kind of like sets the scene if you're a tourist. I mean, just getting like the background of the people in an area that's so small, and then you're like, ooh, a cabin's available in this random town. Let me go stay there. It's like,
it's creepy.
It's like,
I think about it because when I did my northeastern road trip, there were some places I stayed in Vermont that feel very Keddie-like.
Oh.
And we rented like an Airbnb because they didn't even have hotels. And I remember us going out to the restaurant to eat, and I'm looking around, I'm like, these are all just locals.
Yeah. They're all looking at you like, are they worth taking tonight, or should we wait for the next ones?
It was a little creepy. But Keddie is eventually where Sue Sharp would choose to move with her children. Cabin number 28 would become vacant. Now, the interesting part about cabin 28 is the person living there before Sue and her family moved in was the Plumas County Sheriff. His name is Doug Thomas. He'll be important to this story as well. Something to note about Sheriff Thomas is that he was very good friends with Marty Smart while he was living in the cabin.
Okay.
They would often be seen hanging out at the backdoor bar.
I mean, yeah, of all the names you could choose, I would not stop there if I was a tourist.
Oh, you can't make this shit up. This is like a bad movie. It's like somebody
and then they made a bad movie.
Like teenagers wrote this movie. Let's make it the backdoor bar.
It's up in the mountains.
So the backdoor bar was not a gay bar, but it was a spot in the basement of the Keddie Lodge restaurant where Marty was working as a cook.
That's even worse.
In the basement.
Yeah.
It is also rumored that Sheriff Doug Thomas knew Marty was involved in some shady dealings and either looked the other way or was taking a cut of what was happening. This is a small town, small county.
Yep.
Additionally, it was also rumored that Doug Thomas was involved in an affair. He was
Marty.
married.
Oh.
At the backdoor bar. No, he was involved in an affair with Jan, who was one of the managers of the Keddie Resort. And I actually was wrong. Doug Thomas was not married, but Jan was.
Oh, okay.
These same people who rumor all of this say that the two secret couples, so you've got Marty and Sue, and then Jan and Doug, would meet up at the bar and hang out in their like backdoor dealings.
But nothing's
with each other.
secret in this town. How do you have
I'm like, there's only
affairs?
150 people. Everybody
know.
knows what's going on.
Crazy.
It was also stated that Doug Thomas would take Marty along with him when he was cruising the county in his police car. They would just go shoot the shit. I just, once again, this is like a bad movie.
Yeah, it's like kind of people being stuck in the middle of nowhere and they're like, who wants to be the sheriff?
Yeah, I don't know. Small town cops are the scariest
Yeah,
breed.
very scary.
So why Doug Thomas chose to move out of cabin number 28 is not fully known. Maybe Jan's husband found out.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to make it that easy to come kill me in the middle of the night.
Right. But it is believed that when he chose to leave, either he or Marty were the ones that gave Sue heads up so she could move into the cabin.
Oh, okay.
So he moved out. Marty's like, hey, let's move my mistress across the street. That'll go well. A few other events happened between 1979 and 1981 with Sue and her children that I just want to go over real quickly because I didn't know where else to fit them in. I'll get us up to speed and then we'll move into the cabin with the family. One of these events involved Tina, who was 10, and another 8-year-old neighbor girl that lived in the trailer park with them. They were approached by a neighbor and invited into his trailer with promise of ice cream, where he then molested both young girls.
Oh.
Charges were filed by the other girls' parents against the man, but there was a completely bungled investigation by the deputies in the area, which led to this man getting away with traumatizing both girls. This is one of those stories that made me so mad. I was looking, these girls were interviewed by only men deputies, and it sounds like it was done in a really fucked up way. They're little girls. They were afraid. They've just been traumatized by a man. Then you lock them in a room with more men.
With more men.
So they recounted their stories, and it's really sad. I think this incident is probably one of the main reasons Sue wanted to move her family out of that trailer park.
Yeah.
Even if it meant going to
right.
Keddie with 150 people.
I mean, if she really did leave her ex-husband for those reasons too, it makes sense that she would immediately try and get them out of there.
And it's really sad. So Sue has 2 daughters, and we know her oldest daughter was abused by her father, and now her younger daughter is abused by some random neighbor.
You would feel really guilty that somehow it happened to both of them, even though you tried to get her out of that situation.
I know, it's horrible. Additionally, in the spring of 1980, Sue's older daughter, Sheila, would find herself pregnant at the age of 13.
Oh, man.
It is believed that the father could have been one of the older Meeks boys that often visited the trailer when we know parents weren't around, or it could have been one of her other brother's friends, Dana.
Okay.
Dana's important because he is actually the victim that is killed in the cabin because he was good friends with her oldest brother John, and he was there spending the night on the night the murders will happen. But he is also possibly the father of Sheila's child. Either way, the girls in the Sharp family were suffering.
Yeah.
Sue sent her daughter Sheila off to Oregon while she was pregnant to live with her sister, and she did travel to Oregon to be with her daughter while she gave birth. Once the child was born, Sue made the decision on behalf of Sheila to place the baby up for adoption.
Oh, wow.
She told Sheila that she was much too young to care for a child and that she couldn't afford to feed another mouth in their house, which is probably the truth.
It's a hard one.
It is. This is a hard situation.
Yeah. She's very young.
And she would not tell anyone who the father was, or maybe she didn't know. Maybe she was sleeping with multiple boys. I'm not sure. I also saw some really creepy stuff about the father of the baby potentially being an older man.
I mean, I even saw possible.
Marty Smart thrown out there as a potential father. So
it's possible. A lot of times when a child is sexually abused, unfortunately, they find it's not even comfort. It's just they can't stop the advances of an older man. So we have no idea.
And we know older men prey on children that, especially single family, like single mother households.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows who the father of Sheila's baby is.
My heart just breaks more for that child when that child is grown up and looking into her past, his or her past, and maybe they find out who their mom is, but then to find out that they'll never know who their biological father is, no matter what they do. I mean, maybe Ancestry.com. A lot of things are found that way.
True, but not in the 80s. And
very true.
That baby would be like my age. It was born same time I was.
Okay.
It was rumored that Nina Meeks, so that's Sue Sharp's closest friend, was unhappy to hear that Sheila's baby was given up for adoption with no DNA testing done, because if it was her son's baby, she felt slighted that her grandbaby may have been given away, and the Meeks actually had enough money to have maybe raised that child.
That's a hard one.
It was also said that Sheila really wanted to keep her baby, but her mom was ultimately the one that made the decision, and that's why she shipped her off to Oregon. So there's a lot of resentment and things built around this baby that Sheila had at age 13.
Man, but at 13...
that's so young.
It's so young.
So we know this could have led to some fallout between the Sharps and the Meeks, and that may have been another reason Sue wanted to move away from Quincy to Keddie.
Yeah, I get it. I see it.
So much conjecture here because only Sue knows why she did the things she did.
It's completely understandable why Sue would suggest adoption.
I would probably.
Too young.
Yes.
There's 5 of them already. She's already experienced being a single mom with young children at young age. She's only, 36 you said now?
Yeah, she's only 36.
And she has 5 children.
Mm-hmm.
She's already lived the life. She doesn't want her daughter to live it again.
I know.
And yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But I also understand it's your possible grandbaby that you feel like
you should have had a say.
Yeah. But they really can't because she gave birth and she's still a child who has a mother who makes decisions responsible for her.
So this new house, Cabin 28, was larger than the trailer, and it suited their family of 6 much better. When moving to Keddie, I want to catch everybody up to date. We now have the 5 children. John, the oldest, is 15 years old. Sheila, who just had her baby, has now turned 14. Tina is 12. Rick is 10, and the youngest, Greg, is 5 years old. The cabin had been a 2-bedroom property, but there was also a small area in an unfinished basement that Sue would use as a 3rd bedroom for her oldest son, John. This bedroom was only accessible from the outside of the cabin.
Interesting.
Like when you think of cabin, I think of like a little log cabin.
Mm-hmm.
This is like, it's larger than you would think because there's pictures of the cabin. It was like on a hillside so that like the whole basement was down the back.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's like a porch and everything.
We have a lot of properties like that here.
Yes. And this is the mountainous forest region of California. The 2 younger boys shared one of the 2 rooms inside the cabin, and then the girls took the other room. Sue slept in a single twin bed, and her 2 daughters, Tina and Sheila, shared a queen-size bed.
It's not bad.
Better than the trailer.
Yeah, for sure.
There was one bathroom in the cabin for all of them to share. While it was older and run down, sometimes described as a ramshackle kind of place, it was still an upgrade for their family.
I just feel bad for the son who has to walk outside to go back inside to go to the bathroom.
I know. At least he's a boy and go pee in the backyard.
Oh, that's true.
They would move into the cabin in November of 1980, having no idea the horrific tragedy that would occur just 6 months later. So now I'm going to jump to April 11th, 1981, which seemed like just another normal day in the life of Sue and the Sharp children. They had settled into their new residence and adjusted to small town life, although they would all regularly go back to Quincy to visit friends and just for that town infrastructure.
Yeah.
On this morning, Sue and her youngest had just spent time at the Meeks house in Quincy, while her 10-year-old Rick had been at baseball tryouts. While there in Quincy, they saw her oldest son, John, walking around town with his friend Dana. She stopped and picked them up and drove them back to Keddie with her and the 2 younger boys. We know that John and Dana spent a few hours hanging out in the basement in Keddie, and then around 3:30 p.m., they hitchhiked a ride back to Quincy to hang out with friends for the rest of the day and into the night. Tina spent most of the day at the neighbor's cabin number 27, hanging out with her close friend, who was the daughter of another family I'll introduce now called the Seabolts. Around 7 p.m., Sheila, the oldest daughter, went next door also to the Seabolts, and she told Tina that she had to go back home by 10 p.m. to do the dishes, and that her mom said she could not spend the night with the Seabolts as she had planned.
Oh, man.
Sheila, on the other hand, did spend the night at cabin number 27. She was planning to go to church with the family the next morning.
Okay.
That night, the younger Sharp boys, Rick and Greg, also had a friend over to spend the night at Cabin 28. It was Marty and Marilyn Smart's son, Justin, who was 11 years old. He and Rick had been together at the baseball tryouts that morning. So just a normal day, going back and forth. It's a Saturday. I think there's also some stuff about Sue doing some yard work, and there's all these witness accounts that you get this from on what happened that day. Nothing really out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
Around 7 a.m. on Sunday morning, the next day, Sheila walked back over to her house, Cabin 28, to get nicer clothes to change into to wear to church with the Seabolt family. When she opened the door to the cabin, she discovered a grisly scene. Her mother, Sue, her brother, John, and his friend Dana's bloodied and dead bodies were laying on the floor of the living room. They had all been tied up with medical tape and electrical cords, and the living room was completely splattered with blood everywhere.
Oh, my God.
Sheila did not go in the house. Immediately, she ran away, which I don't even know how you would handle seeing something like this at 14. So she ran back next door to the Seabolts and said something terrible has happened. The Seabolts did not have a phone, so the mother of that family took Sheila across to another cabin so they could call the authorities, and the father of the Seabolts went back to the cabin. And he realized, looking in the windows, he didn't actually step into the cabin, but he was looking through the windows. He saw that there were boys in the second bedroom and that they appeared to be alive.
Oh, my God.
So he knocked on the window, woke those boys up, and they took the 3 boys out
that's good.
through the window so they did not have to see what was going on in the living room.
That's good.
So this was Sue's 2 younger boys and then their friend Justin Smart, who had spent the night.
Oh, my God. Yeah. I was wondering where all of this was going to end with that.
So authorities were contacted and they arrived within an hour very quickly. The Plumas County deputies were on site by 8:05 a.m. And when they walked into the cabin, this is what they found. 15-year-old John was the first one inside the door. He was lying face up with his blood-covered hands bound together securely with medical tape. His throat had been slit.
Oh, my gosh.
Dana, who was John's 17-year-old friend, was found next to John on his stomach with his head resting partially on a sofa pillow. His ankles were firmly tied with electrical cord that were also wrapped around John's ankles. So the 2 of them were bound together with these electrical cords.
Oh.
Dana had been bludgeoned to death.
Oh.
And then it appeared he had been strangled. And then finally, Sue Sharp was found lying very close to the sofa, and she had been covered partially with a yellow blanket. She was naked from the waist down. There's evidence that someone had rearranged her from maybe an indecent position.
And then covered her.
She was also tightly gagged. A blue bandana and her own panties were used, and then medical tape was applied over that. There were defensive injuries on her arms. Although she was found naked from the waist down, it's not believed that a sexual assault took place.
Oh.
Her throat had been cut, and she had also been bludgeoned badly in her face and all over her body. There were lone pools of blood on the living room floor and on the sofa pillow, indicating that the boys' bodies may have been moved and staged as well. So somebody made this crime scene the way that it was.
It doesn't make sense. And then to tie them together?
I know. The blood wasn't confined to the floor and on or around the victims. It was discovered everywhere. It was all over the wallpaper and even on some bedding in the girls' bedroom. Blood was also found on the living room ceiling and all over the furniture. The bottoms of Sue's bare feet and the soles of one of the boys' shoes was also covered in blood, which suggested that they were walking around and stepping in blood at some point.
Okay.
Blood was discovered on both bedroom doors and outside on the handrail of the back stairs.
This would be to the stairs.
The back door just leads out onto the porch, but then you can also access the downstairs basement area.
Okay.
From there. So one of the killers at some point went out the back door,
right,
is what this tells us. All 3 victims sustained brutal blows to the head with a hammer, and they were stabbed, sometimes repeatedly. There was also an imprint matching the butt of an .880 rifle on Sue's head. The murder scene was vicious, violent, and bloody. Sheriff Doug Thomas was there because he's the sheriff, and he said at the time of the murders, whoever did this, and there had to have been more than one person, had to have been covered in blood.
Yeah.
It was only after a few more hours of investigating that police realized 12-year-old Tina was missing from Cabin 28. Her younger brothers and their friend had all been left untouched in the cabin, but she was just gone. Because Tina was missing, they called in the FBI to help investigate. While taking a closer look at the scene, investigators found a fingerprint on the handrail on the cabin's back door.
Okay.
They also found that the telephone was left hanging off the hook and that all the lights had been shut off and the drapes closed. Due to this and some other evidence at the scene, authorities believe that the killers had been there for a while, torturing these poor people.
I mean, they went through a lot, it sounds like. It's definitely not quick.
No.
These cabins must not be very close. You think they would hear? I mean, if you're gagged.
They are very close.
Are they?
So that's going to be a lot of part of this is how was it so quiet?
Were the little boys drugged?
We'll get into some of the theories, but for whatever reason, those boys never came out, or if they did, they were told to go back in the room. I don't know what happened there. Okay. We'll talk about the boys in a minute. The murder weapons were believed to have been left at the scene. There were some kitchen knives and a claw hammer. Later, a second bloody knife was found in a trash bin behind the Keddie General Store. On initial investigation, the investigators believed that the weapons used to kill these three came from the home, which is really odd. If someone intended to go into the home to commit murder, wouldn't they bring their own weapons with them instead of just relying on what they could find in the home? There is believed to have been the Daisy 880 pellet rifle that I mentioned used in the attack just because of that one imprint on Sue's head. They never recovered that.
Was that hers or was that just something they determined?
They don't really know. It could have been one of the boys, but that rifle's gone. Maybe it had fingerprints on it, whatever.
Okay.
Although investigators collected a number of items from the scene, it's unclear how much of it was useful. This was a time before DNA testing was very good. So even with the murder weapons, there was only a limited amount of information that they could garner from the scene. Authorities interviewed neighbors and the boys who were inside the house when the attack occurred, but there were no eyewitnesses. There was one couple in a nearby cabin that stated they heard muffled screams or groans sometime between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. But they did not realize anyone was in danger. At one point, I even read that they thought it was sex noises.
Okay.
And they only heard one scream and then nothing more. So they just went back to sleep.
Maybe we should start having a rule that no one makes noises during sex so that we know when someone is dying.
But it makes sense, like you said, if they were gagged, it would be very muffled.
Right.
It might sound like something else going on in the cabin. Rick and Greg claim that they were asleep. They don't recall anything. However, their friend Justin Smart, he was 11, he began having vivid dreams in the days right after the murder. In his dreams, he saw two men in the front room of the cabin, and he said one of the men was holding a small knife and a hammer. Justin would eventually be placed under hypnosis and questioned about his dreams. And while under hypnosis, he would describe the killers as a tall man with blonde hair and a mustache and a short man who was clean-shaven with dark hair. Justin said both men were wearing glasses. He also said that when John and Dana returned from Quincy and came in to the front of the cabin, they began arguing with the men and the confrontation became violent. Justin said he saw one of the men stab Sue. He also said that while this was all going on, Tina woke up and came out of her room and that she was carried out of the house by one of these two men. And then he said the man came back inside the house later, but Tina wasn't with him.
Well, that's very detailed. Yeah.
Right. So although Justin's dreams and the details he provided during hypnosis seem convincing, it's unclear whether he actually witnessed the murders or if the dream simply echoed details that he may have heard in the news.
It was suggested. And
it was also suggested that he was asked leading questions during hypnosis.
Right.
They did take the sketches and they put those out to the public, but they never resulted in any definite suspects or identifications of who those people could be.
Okay.
But here's the interesting piece. Based on Justin's description of the attackers, detectives immediately identified Marty, as one of the primary suspects in the murders, who happened to be Justin's stepfather.
Well, he was having an affair with her, so...
And while they were interviewing him, he offered up a really strange thing. And he said, oh yeah, I have a hammer, but it went missing the other day. I think at the point when he gave this, it hadn't really been clear out there that they were murdered specifically with a hammer. So that's very suspicious.
That is. And isn't he best buddies with the sheriff?
He is. But we're going to talk more about Marty in a minute.
Okay.
He's going to have a lot of inconsistencies in his statement to the police. Crime profilers that have studied this case years and years later will point to language within his statements that say this is a sign someone is being untruthful.
Okay.
So I think Marty, he knows something.
Okay.
They also interviewed the individual who dropped John and Dana back off at home to try and establish when they got back to the cabin, because we know that they went to Quincy to a party to hang out with friends around 3:30 p.m., but nobody really knows exactly when they came back. But they were able to find this person who dropped them off. It was not an easy feat because it was a woman from Quincy who was actually involved sexually with Dana.
Oh, and she was an older woman?
She was in her 30s and he was 17.
Okay.
So she was not real quick to come forward because that's potentially embarrassment. I don't know what the statutory rape is. I think 17, he was still considered legal, but you also don't want to be on record that you were 35 sleeping with a 17-year-old.
It's all right if a dude does it, but
Things are always different for women.
Yep.
From what I gathered, her name was Kathy, and the one detail she did provide to the investigation was that when she went to drop the boys off, it was extremely dark outside of the cabin. She estimated it was probably around midnight. She said it felt really eerie. She dropped the boys off and she took off as quick as possible before confirming they even got inside the cabin because she just felt a vibe. She did state that she saw them heading and she believes they entered through the front door. So that means they would have walked right into maybe an altercation already happening.
Yeah.
Which is what fits with Justin Smart's hypnosis story.
And it is the middle of the night.
Yes. And so maybe somebody was in the cabin thinking they had just Sue.
Yeah.
And then these teenage boys walk in.
Because it doesn't make sense. The teenage boys and her, that really doesn't, unless they were trying to stop something and they were all overtaken.
So now we're going to jump forward 3 years after this investigation kind of went nowhere. They never arrested anyone. They never had any definitive evidence. The one fingerprint from the back handrail was never identified. They couldn't track it to anyone.
Even today?
Even today. I don't know if maybe it wasn't like a full fingerprint. I'm not real sure. I didn't see a lot except for it was basically useless. So 3 years after the Keddie Cabin Murders, on April 22nd of 1984, someone was collecting bottles in the woods in Butte County, which is roughly 60 miles from Keddie, and they found what they thought were human remains.
Oh no, Tina?
Yeah. The area where the remains were found is reportedly very difficult to find, but it's a spot called Camp 18, and it's about 5 miles from Feather Falls, which is a tourist destination. The bottle hunter contacted authorities shortly after discovering the remains, and law enforcement were able to recover what they could of Tina's skeleton, and the medical examiner confirmed it was Tina Sharp via dental records. Now, something strange about Tina Sharp just being found is that reportedly there was an anonymous 911 caller who called into authorities before they had identified that it was Tina. They had just heard that human remains were found around Feather Falls, and this is what the caller said.
Oh.
I was watching the news and they were talking about a girl being found at Feather Falls. I was just wondering if you thought of the murder up in Keddie, in Plumas County a couple years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found. Whoever made that 911 call clearly knew something more about the Keddie Cabin Murders.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the police never investigated the call at the time that it happened. So
Why?
We don't know who it was. They didn't trace it. It's infuriating because that could have probably been a big clue.
Someone with a guilty conscience. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The finding of Tina's remains brought the case back into the limelight for a little while, but nothing would be resolved and the case would go cold again with no further discovery, suspects, interviews, or arrests for quite a while.
So it was determined that she died the same time, though, around the same time. It wasn't like they kept her for a while.
I don't know that I ever saw if they were able to state when she died, but it could have been someone took her to that campsite and kept her for a while. I'm not real sure.
Okay.
We just know she was found 3 years later.
Okay.
Before that, nobody knew what happened to Tina. She just went missing, and there was a lot of speculation that maybe she was kidnapped, trafficked, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So finding the remains did confirm that she died probably at some time close to when Sue and the boys did.
Okay.
In 2004, cabin number 28 was demolished as a condemned building, and there were other buildings nearby that were destroyed too. So now the cabin's completely gone, and there's really no more investigation that can be done there.
You can't keep going back to the same place. You're not going to keep finding things.
You're not going to find.
Although there are some cases when you can do that. I can't remember if it's something that we have done or if it's just a documentary I watched, and maybe I'll have to figure out what that is and we can cover it. But it was like several years later, even maybe like 20 years later, that they went back to the house that a crime was committed, and they ended up finding bullets like in the floor or the wall that they didn't discover before. So,
wow.
I mean, you can find things later.
Yes. And we're going to go into theories here, and maybe this investigation, they wanted to push it through real quick and get rid of it. So I don't know how much was done.
Yeah. And it is a small town.
It's a small town where the sheriff is besties with Marty, who was the number one suspect right away.
A lot of people protecting people.
Mm-hmm. Now, on October 24th of 2009, Sheila Sharp, who's still alive, and she wants to know what happened to her family.
Yeah.
She's traumatized for life. She actually met two psychics at the spot where Cabin 28 used to stand. They were trying to get to the bottom of what might have happened.
Yeah.
So these two psychics, one of them was a medium who said she could speak with the dead, and the other was using EVP. As they approached the site of cabin 28, the medium who could speak with the dead said she heard screaming right away, and the lights on the EVP machine started going wild. The medium said that she had contacted Sue. She basically said that she was walking through the crime. And so she goes on, I'm not going to read through all of it, but she felt like Sue took her into that night and that she could see exactly what was happening within that place, which I think psychics can do that sometimes, like channel. I've seen it on movies. I don't know if I've seen it in real life, but
yeah, that is replaying. Yeah.
And so what she sees is that Sue opens the door and two men entered the cabin, and there was a third man standing behind them.
Oh.
Sue began pleading with them, please don't hurt me, don't do this, whatever they were going to do. She knew immediately that she was in harm's way. She feels Sue pleading with the killers, not my babies, please just kill me and let them go. So she believes Sue was alive and watching them hurt her little baby and his friend and maybe Tina.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes with the evidence, because we know Sue was walking around in blood because there's blood on the bottom of her feet.
Right.
And so there is a lot, when you read the Reddit threads, that some people believe Sue was the initial target, and then they like tied her up, put her on the couch or something, and made her watch them torture her two children and Dana, their friend, which is pretty fucked up.
It's possible that Tina was already killed there and they just took her for some reason.
There is some people who believe that too.
Okay.
It's a weird thing for one of them to be taken away and the other three to be left there.
Unfortunately, she was a young, almost teenage girl,
So the medium said that Sue is stuck in the place and she refuses to leave the site until all three men have been punished.
Oh.
The medium also said that Sue kept pointing in the direction of a cabin and said, go find the men.
Oh, you just gave me full body chills because she pointed at me too. Oh.
And the cabin that she was pointing toward is actually still somewhat structurally sound. And the psychics go into that cabin, which happens to be Marty Smart's cabin. And the EVP goes crazy again. There's another spirit trapped in this cabin. And that spirit is someone I haven't spoken about yet, but he will become a big piece of it as well. And that was Marty's good friend, Bo.
Oh.
Bo was staying in the cabin with Marty at the time of the murders. He was a friend from Vegas that had just been passing through the area, and we'll get into more of him. But the psychic is saying there's a man named Bo stuck in this cabin, and when she starts asking him why he's there, she said, are you guilty in the murder of Sue? And Bo says yes.
It was Doug, Marty, and Bo.
Not Doug.
Damn. But they were besties.
Bo said, please tell Sue I'm sorry. It's not my fault. It's Marty's fault and Dee's. So another person comes up named D. He said he's still alive and he knows what happened.
Oh, wow. When was this done?
In 2009.
Okay.
And then they go into more details about what happened, which I'm not going to read here. I will put this in the show notes if you want to read about what happens.
So did we know about Bo prior to this?
We did.
Psychic thing?
So we'll go into it. Bo was part of the interviewed people because he was staying with Marty at the time. And this will go into all the theories later. And then this D. Lake guy is kind of new information that was brought in around 2009.
Okay.
And not a lot is still known about him. So a lot of theories about who this D guy could be.
Okay.
So that was in 2009. And then we jump to 2013. Nothing has really been happening on the case. Plumas County gets a newer sheriff. His name is Greg Hagwood, and he decided to look into the case again. He was in his third year of office, and although he had many priorities to contend with inside his department, and they were short on funding and short-staffed, he just felt like called to look at this unsolved murder.
Of course you would. It's a small county, probably one of the bigger ones that they've had to deal with.
For sure. And he said it still haunted him and that he actually knew the boys. He knew John and Dana. He went to school with them. So he had a personal connection and he really, really wants to solve this case.
Yeah.
And he said Keddie Cabin was actually one of the main things that led him when he graduated from high school to go to California State University in Sacramento and get a degree in criminal justice.
Yep. That's how everybody who ends up doing what they do in that field, something inspired them and makes sense.
And he became a deputy in 1988, so 7 years after the murder happened. And he kept asking questions like, can I work on this case? And none of the sheriffs would ever let him near it. So when he became sheriff, he's like, this is my time. And he also reached out to another former deputy named Mike Gamberg, who had since retired from being a public cop and was now a private investigator. So he asked Mike to come help him with the case, because he would do it for cheap. Mike Gamberg and Sheriff Hagwood are kind of like this little duo that's trying to figure this out. Mike had a very personal connection as well. He had been the martial arts coach for Dana and John, and he also said Dana had spent the night at his house a couple of times. We'll find out later that Dana was a troubled child. He was in foster care and had a lot of things. So Mike had a real soft spot for Dana specifically.
Yeah. And Dana, sadly, is kind of lost in the story because it was a family and he was the friend.
And Dana is lost because he was a foster child. Yeah. Nobody really knew about his family. He was just friends with John. And it is sad because I couldn't find much about him.
Yeah.
To talk about. We always like to talk about the victims as much as we can. Mike Gamberg had some strong opinions about what had happened 32 years earlier at Cabin 28. He had been a deputy at the time of the murders, and he claims that Sheriff Doug Thomas kept him and many other deputies out of the Keddie Cabin investigation. So he's going to be one that really pushes there was
something going on.
Some cover-up going on. Yes.
But dudes, eventually you die and move on, and other people are going to come in.
And that's what's happening
in this
case, which is good. I'm hoping.
Yes. Fingers crossed.
We'll see. Mike was so excited to come back onto the case and actually be able to look at the evidence. And he, along with Sheriff Hagwood, are the ones that have gone box after box of evidence. And he said there were just file drawers filled with information, but everything was in complete disarray.
Because no one actually cared, or they were told not to work on it.
I think that's exactly. The sheriff said, no, you can't do that. And there was a vow of silence on this case for 20 to 30 years. And it wasn't until this new generation got in there that they're like, we're going to look at this.
Good.
Now, Mike said one of the hardest parts to understand where this case was is that the history log, which is, I guess, is really important to investigations. It tells you who did what and on what date, has just gone missing. And Mike is like, I don't think this was an accident. He thinks somebody specifically destroyed it. He also said that much of the physical evidence taken from Cabin 28 was still in storage. This included the living room carpet, the wallboard, and other items marked with blood.
Well, that's good.
Problem is that it's completely disorganized. And he also said much of the evidence that was kept in storage was supposed to be placed in a freezer to preserve it because it's DNA matter, and the freezer just mysteriously got turned off.
It sounds like someone was doing their job of covering things up on their way out.
I think so. And Mike was quoted in a newspaper saying, this case is as screwed up as a soup sandwich.
Yeah.
He compared the available evidence in 1981 to someone firing a shotgun loaded with evidence and no one following up on all of it as it spread out like pellets. He said it was just everywhere. And he didn't understand why, because there was plenty of evidence. They should have been able to solve this case.
Because everybody knew each other and everybody knew who did it.
Mm-hmm. As he sorted through the evidence, he did find one bag at the very bottom of all of the pile of shit that was never opened. And in this envelope that was never opened, he found that tape recording of the anonymous caller to Butte County Dispatch, the 911 call.
Ooh, a voice.
He sent the tape recording out for analysis, comparing that male voice to recorded voices of other identified as potential or known suspects. But from what I saw as of today, they've never been able to match that voice to anyone that they suspected. But remember, there's that D Lake guy that we don't really know who is. I'm wondering if that's who it could be.
Although I kind of would imagine it's someone who's just close to whoever was a part of it and knew of it. Someone who was close to Marty, close to Bo, someone who knew what happened. They like confided in that person.
Maybe.
They just knew and were feeling guilty about it.
Very possible. Mike believes that the tape was deliberately ignored when it arrived at the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, and that's why it was buried way deep and never opened or entered into evidence.
Because someone knew that voice.
If they had investigated it then, they probably could have traced the call.
Yeah.
There was obviously some kind of tampering going on within the sheriff's office at the time. After looking through all of the evidence, Mike Gamberg believes that there are 2 accomplices that are still out there that have information about the Keddie Cabin murderers. He said there are people locally who know more than they've said, and I believe we've identified some of them, and we know who they are, and we know where they are, and I have every confidence that they either participated after the fact or they have firsthand information.
Okay.
So we don't know what that evidence is, but just know that they're working on it. So they reopened this case in 2013. In 2016, a hammer was was found in a pond near where the Keddie Cabin 28 once stood. Mike said his tip came by way of someone who attended a wedding in the Keddie area. A woman had lost her ring, and so a man returned with a metal detector in an effort to recover it from the lake.
Oh.
And what he discovered with that metal detector was a hammer.
Oh.
And he contacted authorities. Mike went there to the pond and recovered that hammer. And they said the pond would have been a natural place for someone to conceal something like that because it was so close to the cabin.
Yeah.
It's very likely that that hammer could have been involved in the murder.
And maybe more than one hammer.
Well, we know that because there were some left on the site.
Oh, okay.
But remember, Marty said he was missing a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very specific about the hammer he was missing. And this one that they found in the pond matched to what Marty said his hammer looked like. Mike realized that looking through all of this, that there was no evidence that the special agents or the detectives ever even looked in the pond back in 1981 for evidence, which is really concerning considering they had a missing child.
Yeah.
Why did they never look in the pond?
Right.
So Mike did send that hammer out to be whatever they can do with a hammer. He said there are layers and layers of rust on it. It's, 30-something years old, but he's hoping that they can slowly take that rust away. But apparently that takes a long time to do something like that.
Yeah, you can't rush that.
The other thing that was found is DNA from Justin Smart. I can't remember exactly what piece. Maybe I have this listed later, but there was something from the crime scene that had Justin's DNA on it. And a lot of people believe this goes back to the story that he did walk out and see something going on and perhaps went back in the room and hid.
Yeah.
And then when he knew the men left, some people believe that Justin's the one that came out and covered up Sue because she was laying there naked. And that makes sense for an 11-year-old boy.
And he was traumatized. He probably, he knew what was going on, but he's also not there. And he just walked out and, I can picture exactly that happening and him just grabbing a blanket and covering her and then going back in the room. And it makes sense that he would be the one that's awake. It's not his house.
Exactly.
He was spending the night. He's not going to be able to fall asleep as easily.
Mm-hmm.
He's up. He's wired. He's staying at a friend's house and all of this is happening. It makes sense.
He was the oldest of the three, and it's very possible the other two saw something or at least knew it was going, but they were traumatized and shocked. You know how it is when you hear a noise in the middle of the night and you just freeze. I could imagine, especially the 5-year-old.
I can imagine the older brother of the 5-year-old holding the little 5-year-old and them eventually passing out, and Justin's just sitting there holding his knees, waiting for it to be over, and then they passed out and he went and checked.
Or Justin is Marty's stepson.
Oh, yeah.
Justin opened the door and saw his stepfather in there, and Marty says, "Get the fuck back in that room." And he does. We do know that his DNA was on the crime scene, so I think that gives clear indication that his hypnosis, his dream, or whatever he says it was, probably really did happen.
But he was also in the house. He was sleeping over. So what kind of DNA are we talking about and on what?
Right. Or if Marty Smart was the murderer and he brought something from the house where Justin lived, like medical tape or a hammer or anything like that, it could potentially have Justin's DNA on it.
It's possible that Justin made up who he saw because he knew it was his stepfather, and his stepfather said, "Go back in the room. If you say anything about this, I'm killing your mother."
Mm-hmm.
Or
I'll kill you.
Or your brothers and sisters.
Or I'll kill your 2 friends that are in there with you.
Yeah. We don't know how scary Marty was.
No. So this is a great segue because we're going into theories now. So I've shared everything that we know about the case. And so all of this is out there, and this is what has led to the Reddit threads.
Oh, we didn't just do theories?
No.
Just kidding.
I'm getting into all the theories now. And I will bring up, some of the information that came out of interviews, and we'll talk more about Marty and Bo.
Okay, sounds good.
I will start, as we usually do, with what I think are the least likely, moving towards what seems to me the most likely scenario based on the evidence we have. So we'll start with robbery. Some have posited that the murderers were never intended, but rather the result of a robbery gone wrong. After all, the weapons that the murderers used were taken from the home. Mm-hmm. If someone intended to go into the home to commit murder, then surely they would have brought their own. I can see this point of view, and I agree that it is odd that the weapons used were mostly taken from the home, but there's also no evidence that anything was stolen from Cabin 28, and Sue and her family were not well off. They wouldn't have had much to steal in the first place.
Yeah.
If a robber was to target a home, why would they target Cabin 28?
You did say that this was...
It's a railroad town.
Yeah.
So there are transients, and there are always people with addictions, like a drug problem that will break in anywhere.
Always a possibility.
But why would the robber commit such violent murders if their intent was just to steal some stuff?
It was very personal.
It's one thing to strangle someone in order to kill them, and entirely another to spend a lot of time on the scene torturing victims.
Exactly.
Which we know it was done.
Yep.
And there just seems to have been some degree of rage and anger to this killing and emotions that a robber just wouldn't have had.
And what seemed like the embarrassment of what they did to Sue.
Yes.
And then not sexually assaulting her. So it seems very personal.
And why would a robber have just run off with Tina?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of weight in that one. Number 2 is drugs. There's some evidence that both John and Dana were involved with some drugs. And the night of the murders, John and Dana, it was found that they were coming home from a party that involved drugs. John Sharp had once broken into a house and stolen some marijuana, and Dana was a ward of the court, and he was actually on probation at the time for drugs. A witness did come forward claiming that Dana had stolen some LSD from local drug dealers, but there was really no evidence that could back that statement up. So all that being said, a few teenagers dabbling in drugs does not necessarily mean that the murders were committed because of drugs.
No, I don't see it.
Killing 3 people and abducting and murdering a
little girl, no.
A little girl over a small amount of marijuana or LSD that these teenagers killed just seems pretty extreme.
I mean, maybe if they stole like a suitcase of Coke or something,
right?
But yeah.
And this isn't an area known for like drug cartels. Furthermore, if this killing was some sort of revenge for the boys stealing drugs or whatever, why would they have left 3 boys in the front room untouched? Like, if it's a drug dealer, I've watched Narcos, like they would have killed everybody in the cabin.
Yep.
So I'm not convinced that the drug angle played a major part in this case, but it is possible that law enforcement has additional drug-based evidence that they're withholding from the public, which will lead into the theory I'll cover in a minute of a conspiracy, a cover-up, whatever you want to call it, because we will find out the main suspects that come up, Marty and Bo, did have some suspicious ties to a drug ring.
Okay.
While I don't think drugs was the primary reason for the murders, I think that it may be the primary reason for the cover-up that could have happened.
Which makes sense in a small town like that. Multiple people are involved in multiple things.
Yes.
And if one thing comes out, then it's going to bring out this other thing. And you can't let that happen, especially if the sheriff is involved.
Especially if the sheriff is peddling the drugs.
Yeah.
So another theory was that it was one of Sue's love interests. She did have a few boyfriends here and there. And this theory is someone other than Marty. They know definitively that the murderer was not Sue's ex-husband. Automatically, you look at someone closest to the victim.
Mm-hmm.
In her time in Quincy and Keddie, she had gone through about 3 boyfriends. The authorities did look into those and ruled them out pretty quickly. And this takes us on another tangent about Sue, which I don't know if I believe or not, but I have to bring it up because we're covering all angles. There was suggestion that Sue was a sex worker. It was a railroad town and
extra money.
And a lot of people were saying there's no way that she could afford to put her kids in martial arts and baseball and some of the activities that the boys were involved in on what they knew she was making. We know she was living off the $250 Navy stipend and maybe some government help, but she had recently dropped out of the community college, so she wasn't getting money from CETA.
But she was working, right?
She wasn't working once she moved to Keddie. She had been working at the Elks Club when she lived in Quincy. So a lot of people were like, how was she filling in the gaps?
Who fucking cares if she was a sex worker? As long as it wasn't around the kids.
Part of the reason that it's believed she could have been a sex worker is that there was a railroad worker that was interviewed who came through Keddie often. And he mentioned that it was well known among the workers that Sue Sharp was the go-to working girl in Keddie.
Okay.
This is really sad. There was also speculation that Sheila and maybe even Tina were offering services.
Oh, shit.
I pray to God that's not true. They were only 14 and 12.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go with that, but it's brought up because this was a murder that was very brutal, and we know sex crimes can be very brutal like this. And so some people are like, maybe it was one of the Johns that Sue or Sheila or Tina was servicing and he went crazy.
Again, with those 3 boys left in the bedroom, I don't know.
The other thought was that one of the men, perhaps that Sue was entertaining, had his eye on her 12-year-old daughter, Tina. He came into the cabin intending to kidnap Tina. Sue was in the way. He murdered her, and then the boys showed up and he ran off with Tina, which leads into the other big theory is, was this whole crime about Tina? Was she the main target to begin with? Everyone focused in on Sue being the main target, but Tina was the one abducted.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the clear motive.
I don't know. That's still a lot of people to have to go through to get to one girl.
And that's where I have the problem with this one. Now, what Sheriff Greg Hagwood has to say about Tina is, I do think Tina was absolutely central to why this happened, because I think there was something about Tina that could not be left behind to be discovered.
Oh, maybe she was pregnant.
He said, it's my strong sense that there's something about Tina that did not allow for her to be left there. So that is one of the angles they look at, because it is odd that Tina was taken.
Yeah.
Many will suggest that Tina was taken from the crime scene for sexual purposes. The theory is that after the perpetrators assaulted her and or kept her captive for a while, they killed her.
Yeah.
So she could have been kept at that campsite.
What I immediately thought of.
The only credible part of this that kind of creeps me out is that it was known that there was a man obsessed with Tina.
Oh.
She was his teacher's pet. It was her school teacher. Now, Tina, something I haven't mentioned about her is that she needed extra help in school. And so she went to a special education class a few times a week. And it was led by this man named Joel Walker Lipsey.
He just sounds like a pedophile.
He was taking pictures of her. And actually, one of the main pictures that you see in this case of Tina is one that Joel took. And it looks like a man taking a picture of his girlfriend or something. I don't know how else to describe it. I'll show it to you later.
I mean, she's 12.
He actually kept a picture of Tina on his desk.
What the fuck? How was he not arrested just for that?
And when authorities went to his home, he had pictures of Tina on display within his home.
Oh my God.
To make matters worse, Joel was already convicted of molesting a child. California court documents indicate he had been convicted of lewd or lascivious acts with a child under 14, and yet he was still hired as a teacher.
What the fuck?
Beware of small towns.
I know. Yeah. Because here's the thing, in a lot of these places, they don't even look into people's backgrounds. They just hire them.
I know. This freaks me out, but the reason they never went down this path is because the teacher had a solid alibi that they could confirm with multiple people that he was not there that night. So while he was obsessed with her and probably eventually would have done something to her.
Yeah, or maybe already was.
We don't think he was the one that killed her family and abducted her.
Okay.
But it's just another fucked up piece. And Tina had already been sexually abused by that neighbor.
Yeah.
Now she had a teacher. And then I read that perhaps she's doing sex work.
Yeah, it's possible. And if he was obsessed with her, I wonder
if other men.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's too many grown men attracted to little blonde 12-year-old girls.
And unfortunately, like I said, you know, like, I'm not going to judge you if that's what you do to bring in money, but if they know you have younger girls, they'll be like, well, like mother, like daughter, this is what your mom does. So this is what you need to do. And they'll take advantage of them too.
The other piece I have with making it hard for Tina to have been the main target is if somebody just wanted to run away with Tina. She's at school.
Yeah.
Her mom's never home.
They
didn't need to come in and murder 3 people to take off with Tina. They could have done that at any other time. Right. So like it could be somebody who came in to kill Sue but was also into her daughter and ran off with her. That's possible, but I don't think she's the main reason that people came in that night.
No.
And now I get to the most prominent theory, and some version of this is probably the most likely. And that is that Marty Smart and his friend, Bo Boobaday, committed the murders.
Well, that's a name.
Boobaday.
Did he have a wife? And she's like, nope, just one boob a day.
I had to look up how to pronounce this. I think it's French. I don't know.
Oh.
But Boobaday is what I saw. So
okay.
Now I will just think of that.
Well, Bo has a guilty conscience.
And he's living, according to those psychics, in Marty's old cabin.
Is he dead?
Yes, he's dead.
Did he die in the cabin?
No, but his spirit is supposedly trapped there, according to the psychic.
Okay.
I guess I'll preface all of this with Marty and Bo are both dead.
Okay.
That's why in the beginning I said, like, the main suspects we could never bring to justice because they've already been brought to justice by karma.
Yeah.
It's believed that they may have had other accomplices after the fact, or like the psychic said, there might have been a third person with them named D.
Okay.
But there is a lot of strong evidence to me that suggests that both Marty and Bo were definitely involved. even without DNA or fingerprints, there's a lot of circumstantial stuff out there. It is believed also the reason there's no fingerprints or DNA is that anyone who came into the cabin was wearing gloves.
Yeah.
I guess that goes without saying.
Right.
In 2008, Marilyn Smart, who was Marty's wife at the time, she's now his ex-wife. As you can imagine, she wanted nothing to do with him after all of this. But she said in a documentary that she always suspected her ex-husband and Beau of committing the murders.
Okay. Well, there you go.
But what was their motive? It was believed that he was involved with Sue in that extramarital affair, and either she had threatened or had already told his wife, Marilyn, that they were sleeping together. It also came out in interviews that she had been counseling Marilyn about leaving Marty.
Okay. Well, what if Marty was Sheila's baby daddy? Or Marty was having a relationship with Sue because he wanted her daughters?
I think that's possible. I brought up earlier that some suspected he was the father of Sheila's child.
Yeah.
Maybe he wanted access to Tina too, and Sue was blocking him. And
or maybe
he had a
she
fit.
found out that something did happen.
And she's like, I'll kill you, or I'll tell somebody.
Or maybe that leads to the theory that Tina was pregnant. Sue found out.
Mm-hmm.
Tina told her who did what with her or whatever, and it all came to a head.
There could be a lot going on.
Oh my gosh, small town.
It also came out that Marty had recently lost his job and they were about to get kicked out of cabin number 26. You know, that's the whole reason they had a place to live.
Right.
Marilyn was confiding into Sue that she was having marital problems. Now, remember that it's only a rumor she was having an affair with Marty. Maybe Sue wasn't even sleeping with Marty. Maybe she was trying to tell Marilyn, this guy has come on to me and I've turned him down. I don't want to be with him, but you should leave this loser. He just lost his job and now you're going to be homeless. Like, get away from him.
Yeah, we can't forget that it is a rumor that they were seeing each other.
So much rumor and conjecture.
I know.
It makes it hard to talk about this case. But remember that women are always painted in a much meaner light. I don't even know what to say than they should be.
They're asking for it, all of it.
Always. Many also state that Marty was involved with drugs and that he had been caught making hashish in his cabin, number 26, and he was selling it to patrons of the restaurant, and that's why he lost his job as the cook, which seems pretty likely considering what he's done in his past.
Because Marty wasn't smart.
No. And Jan used to be dating Doug Thomas, and Jan's the owner of the restaurant. And like, she knows all of this too, because it's small town. Doug Thomas was probably helping sell the drugs or getting a cut or whatever. So to me, this just all ties together to some stupid web. Yep. Sue was going to be the one that outed them all.
Yeah.
She knew all of this.
For whatever. For multiple things.
Especially if they were having an affair, she would know all of the ins and outs.
Right. She knew too much.
And then she found out he got her daughter pregnant. This is the final straw. I'm turning your ass in. I'm going to the state. I'm going to go above the county or whatever, because she knows she can't trust Doug. So I think there is.
It could be that. The other thing that keeps coming into my mind is that they wanted to kill Sue. The boys did come home. That all happened.
Right.
They knew the other boys were in the room. That is his stepfather. They weren't going to do anything to the little boys, but then the little girl came out.
Yes.
And they weren't ready to do anything with her yet. But she started screaming or like thrashing or something. And someone's like, just go put her in the car and gag her. Like, just get her out of here for now.
Exactly. And then they accidentally killed her or something.
Or they had to decide what to do with her after that. And then they finally came to the conclusion, we have no other choice. Mm-hmm. We have to get rid of her.
Hold that thought, because that does come up in some interviews with Marty. He says something about Tina and that she saw too much.
Okay. And they couldn't kill Justin because then that would directly link him.
Mm-hmm. And also, Marty wouldn't kill Justin's best friends in front of him.
No, because it would directly link back to him as well.
Mm-hmm. So that's why a lot of people believe Marty had to have been involved. The fact that his child or stepchild was sleeping at the house is why those three boys were left alone.
Did he not know his stepchild was sleeping at the house?
He did not know.
Oh.
There is a lot about how just Marty sucked as a dad. I mean, I guess he was a stepdad or whatever, but like, he was out of touch. Like, Marilyn probably, she knew that her son was sleeping over there, but she also didn't know that her husband was going to go into that cabin and kill people.
Right.
So my guess is Justin opened the door and Marty's like, fuck.
Yep.
My kid's here.
Yep.
So Marilyn did tell the police at the time when the murders happened that she had been talking to Sue about leaving Marty and that Marty had been abusive emotionally for the most part, but she feared he would become physically abusive. She mentioned that he had tried to run her and one of her children over with a car. So yes, it's highly likely that Sue might have been telling Marilyn to get away from Marty and helping her figure out ways to do so because she also had left an abusive relationship.
Right.
I could see these two women bonding over that and just her helping.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the fact that Sheriff Doug Thomas and Marty Smart were great pals and spent a lot of time together. We know that Doug Thomas even lived in Cabin 28 prior to Sue arriving there. And it was known that when Marty was having trouble with his wife, because he and Marilyn fought quite often, even before Sue entered the picture, it sounds like Marty was messing around on Marilyn with multiple women. Doug would always let Marty come sleep on his couch for a week or two or whatever when he and Marilyn were on the outs.
Which means Marty and whoever else knew that cabin really well.
They did. He was in that cabin all the time.
Yeah.
He knew the layout. It's not that big of a cabin, but more than anything, he was super close with Doug.
Yeah.
There was a lot of evidence that came out that many believe Doug was aware of, but just chose to either look past or push into those records of evidence that were eventually lost.
Yep.
One of the biggest things was the fact that Marty mentioned his hammer was missing. He just looked past that. There was also another neighbor that mentioned they saw Marty and Bo in the early morning hours making a bonfire and taking clothes off to burn.
Okay.
This was like stripped from some of the evidence, but like these are things that were discovered later.
You know what? And I think back to Marty making that stupid comment, and it's because he's not smart. And he probably in the moment was like, well, I better say my hammer was stolen.
I know. Or he was coached. There's a lot of that too. When the profilers look at the statements from Marty and Bo, like many years later, they say that the deputies are asking very leading questions and suggesting things that they should say.
Yeah.
So
because they have to have it recorded.
It was all in writing from what I saw. I don't think there's any recordings. A lot of stuff was gone missing in this case.
Of course.
The other very suspicious part about Marty is that he left really quickly after the murders took place. But that's also because he didn't have a place to live anymore because he got fired. So
yeah.
But it's always very suspicious when the number one suspect just skips town.
Yep.
They also didn't really do a good job of searching Marty's cabin, even though he was the number one suspect at the time. They did very shoddy work going through the cabin. Of course they did,
because the sheriff was in charge.
Mm-hmm.
He probably walked through at the same time and said, people are like, should we take this? And he's like, no.
Exactly.
We don't need that.
But at one point, Marilyn actually did find a bloody jacket in their basement, which she believed belonged to Tina.
And she did what with it?
She gave it to the authorities, but there was no record that the jacket was ever entered into evidence.
I would have called the FBI. Tina was on the FBI's radar. I would not have given it to the local authorities.
That's pretty damning evidence. The other thing that we have is a letter that Marilyn received from Marty after he moved away because she was like, we're not together anymore. They went their separate ways and Marilyn and her kids moved somewhere. I'm not real sure. And then Marty went somewhere else and he sent a letter back to her. It said, I've paid the price of your love. And now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through?
Oh my God.
Great. What else do you want?
See, he's not smart. Marty clearly is the guy, one of the guys.
One of them. There was another time when Marty, he was ex-military. I don't remember which branch, but he went to the VA and he had a therapist there and she alerted authorities. This was years later. He was living in Reno, Nevada at the time, and he confessed to her because he thought he was protected in a therapy session that he committed a murder.
Okay.
But nothing was done, even though she reached out to the authorities. And I'm not real sure. It doesn't say who she reached out to or who was still, like, I don't know if Doug Thomas was still the sheriff at the time.
Yeah.
It sounds like even after Doug Thomas left, whoever took over for him continued the cover up for a while.
Well, because it might have been Doug's closest
deputy that he got promoted.
Or whatever, right.
Yeah. So, or he was involved. Who knows? But that's another thing that comes out here where it's like, this is so fucking obvious that Marty was involved for sure.
Yeah.
All the other logistics of the murder and how it happened, whatever, like Marty should have easily been taken in 1981 just based on this stuff, and he wasn't.
Because of Doug.
So the other person, John Bo Boobaday, nobody really knew much about him. He just showed up in town and had been there for a couple of weeks, and his story changed multiple times. He at one point told the police that he was a former policeman himself. He used to work in Chicago PD. He also told them one time that he was there because Marilyn was his niece, which neither of those things were true when they looked into it.
Okay.
It's also very unclear how Marty even knew Bo to begin with. They had this story that they said they met in the psychiatric unit at the VA in Reno, Nevada.
Well, maybe that explains his compulsive lying.
When they did some research, some of the internet sleuths, there was nothing that could ever be found about a Bo Bubade ever going to the VA. There was no records of him in Reno, Nevada. He was in the Air Force. That was one thing that he said that was true, but everything else coming out of Bo's mouth was untrue. But there is a high suspicion, and some of this has been traced back, that Bo was involved in organized crime in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Drugs, probably.
Yeah.
So Bo made up a story and nobody really knew what to make of it at the time in 1981. But the reason that he came to Keddie at the time that he did and all of that is really not known. We just know that he had been sleeping on Marty's couch for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
We also know that Marty and Bo went out that night on April 11th, 1981 to the Backdoor Bar. And the really odd thing about their going out this night is that they dressed up in full suits with vests and wore sunglasses inside. And so a lot of people think that they did this on purpose to draw attention to themselves in order to set up an alibi, because nobody's not going to remember two guys in full suits with sunglasses.
Yeah, acting like what, Miami Vice or something?
I guess.
What's going on?
It's the 80s.
Like, Marty, why aren't you in your regularly stained, ripped shit?
Exactly.
What is going on?
Where'd you even get a suit from? Bo must have brought it because, he's not a suit kind of guy. They know that they showed up at the bar around 10 p.m., but then they disappeared for a little while. And when they were questioned about this, they said that they got upset when the DJ changed the music from country to rock.
Okay.
And then they also made a call from the cabin to say, we'll come back later if you change the music. So a lot of people believe this was all done purposefully and that it was a premeditated strike. This just shows that they didn't just show up at Sue's house and get into a fight. People believe that Marty and Bo planned to go over to Sue's and murder her that night.
Okay.
They did show back up at the bar again later, and they stayed until it closed at 2 a.m. Where they had previously been in full suits. When they came back, they were no longer wearing their vests.
Okay. So did they only burn vests?
Here's my thought is that we know that Kathy dropped the boys off around midnight. So they showed up at the bar at 10, all dressed up so everybody saw them. Then they left. A lot of people believe they went back to Marty's cabin and changed clothes.
Okay.
Then went over and did the murder thing.
And then they forgot to put the vests back on?
And then they went back to change because they were in a rush to get back to the bar before it closed.
Oh.
And they forgot the vests.
Okay.
And it is weird that you were in full suit and then you come back without the vests, or maybe the vests were just uncomfortable. I don't know.
I mean, they are, aren't they?
So in hearing all of this evidence against Marty and Bo, it seems like it should have been an easy case to just move forward with. They sounded pretty fucking guilty to me.
Yeah.
But why would they have not been arrested and brought forward? This goes into the whole, there has to be some kind of cover up going on or the police were involved.
Yep.
And not only the local police, it's believed that the California Department of Justice was also involved.
Okay.
During the reinvestigation of the case, Sheriff Hagwood and Mike Gamberg said that the sheriff's office and the California Department of Justice completely blew it in 1981. There were several leads that were never followed and evidence that was never checked and other that was just ignored. I can look at a podunk sheriff department messing up, but when you get to the California level, Department of Justice, and they're saying they even ignored things, that does smell fishy.
Yes, it does.
One of the strange things that Mike and Sheriff Hagwood talk about is that when questioning happened, they brought both Marty and Bo in for questioning, and they interviewed them at the same time in the same room.
Oh.
Side by side. Why would they do that? That's weird.
You don't do that. Everybody knows that.
They also said that during these interviews, they would ask questions that they literally knew the answers to. And Marty and Bo would both lie, like the way that, cop questioning should go. And they would never call them out. They never pushed back. It was almost like they were just going through a formality to get it done.
Reading questions off a sheet.
And perhaps giving them answers ahead of time. This is a mystery of the case. Those two were never questioned separately. And they were only questioned this one big time.
Highly suspicious.
Another really mysterious part to this investigation is that on the day of the murder, Sheriff Doug Thomas called in the Department of Justice right away. this was a homicide, and perhaps he just knew that his police force was not equipped to handle a homicide of this size, and he felt like he needed to reach out to the state.
Yeah.
But I also feel like that's not done very often. Usually counties want to keep their cases, or maybe I've watched too many movies, but to like just reach out to the state right away is not always done.
Yeah, I mean, typically what I've seen is that they don't want to be overstepped on by, a bigger department. So yeah, that's odd. Unless he's playing both sides.
Well, I think there could be some of that, because what was really interesting is that when he did reach out to the California Department of Justice, instead of them sending their homicide detectives, they sent 2 detectives from the Organized Crime Unit. And the Organized Crime Unit is usually handling mob-related crimes. And so this brought Mike Gamberg to theorize something about Bo Bubade. The reason they were questioned in tandem, or maybe not questioned as much as like normal people would have been, is that it's believed that Bo actually had ties to the mob, I guess you want to say organized crime, back in Chicago, and he had been working as a police informant.
Oh. And if Doug was involved, or deputies there, then interviewing them together was to keep Marty comfortable.
Yes. Because Marty would not have been in on this, from what I understand. And maybe Bo, because we don't know why Bo just showed up to stay in the cabin. Bo was onto a lead. We know that Marty was involved in drugs.
Yeah.
And maybe Doug Thomas was friends with Marty to gain information. I don't know. This can get really complicated.
Like I said, he's working both sides. He is a sheriff. Maybe they thought the sheriff was doing what a sheriff should do, but really he was sucked into both. He was a local person.
Or maybe the DOJ had already called Sheriff Doug Thomas and said, we're sending an informant in to check on this Marty guy. And Doug Thomas knew when this murder happened and Bo was involved, he better fucking called the DOJ back to save his own ass.
Exactly. He was a local guy. That was his favorite buddy or whatever. But when you find out that bigger guns are getting involved, like...
Doug Thomas will find out, very interestingly enough, right after the Keddie murders happened and he called in the DOJ and all of this, he would get promoted to actually go work a job for the DOJ. And Doug Thomas was put into that position within 90 days. And everything I saw about it and why it's suspicious is because the exact role that he was given, he wasn't qualified for. And it usually requires a very extensive background check. And they're like, there's no way they could have hired this man and moved him into the position within 90 days and done that thorough background check unless there was some promise, like a handshake, like the DOJ said, we're sending Bo in to find out what's going on. If you help us, we have a job for you. So there was definitely some favors and shit going on.
Okay. This whole Sue murder and her kids, it was never supposed to be a part of it.
It wasn't. This was Marty going rogue.
Yeah.
And Doug knew at that point he couldn't cover for Marty, but because Bo was involved, they also couldn't take Marty down without exposing that Bo was a police informant.
Yeah.
So this gets into like some movie style stuff that I can't even wrap my head fully around.
Right.
But we know that both Marty and Bo were allowed to walk free and that they only had that one interview together. It makes sense if you think about all of the other things we just went through.
It does.
And perhaps this would have all been solved at some point, but we're going to see that Bo Bubade, he's going to pass away in 1988. So just 7 years after the murders, Bo is gone.
Okay.
We don't have any way to question him anymore. The only thing I know about him is that he moved back to the Chicago area. If he was involved in organized crime, I don't know if that had something to do with his untimely death, but he died very young.
Okay.
And I didn't find a lot of details about why.
Sounds like he was living quite a wild life.
And then Marty would pass away in 2000.
God said, I don't want you coming into this century.
No, like we're done. So many speculate that the DOJ was more interested in what they had going on and using Bo as their informant, and potentially Marty and Doug were involved somehow as well. And they were using Bo to get to some bigger fish in the organized crime realm.
Right.
And then when this poor family got murdered, even if it was Marty and Bo who had a hand in it, that wasn't important to them.
Of course not.
Sue was rumored to be a prostitute. They saw her as a negligent mother. They were a very poor family.
Yeah.
They were collateral damage.
Yep.
There was no way they were going to arrest either Marty or Bo and risk their entire plot being exposed, and then they lose their connection to the organized crime.
Yep.
And this all makes sense to me.
Yes, it does. It's fucking unfortunate, but of course it does. Little folk don't matter.
No.
Like I said, it wasn't supposed to happen, and they're like, well, crap.
They just picked a loose cannon, which happens all the time probably when they pick people to help them. You're helping drug dealers and addicts. And
yes. Marty was
a loose cannon.
A good guy.
And maybe they picked him to help because Doug was like, oh, he's my bro.
Maybe.
He'll help us out.
Yeah.
And then he's like, what the fuck, Marty? You just murdered a woman in front of.
And her kids?
Yeah. And then they had to cover it up because bigger fish to fry.
Yes.
And finally, I have one more twist on this whole Marty and Bo did it theory. There is an entire website dedicated to proving something even more dark and twisted than what I've already mentioned.
Oh.
There's a local man who has been working with Mike Gamberg over the past several years since the case reopened, and he prefers to stay anonymous. He goes by the name of DMAC. He runs a whole website called cabin28.com, and his name has been released to the public by people in the area because it's small town and a lot of people call him out. I'm not going to release his name because he obviously doesn't want it to be.
Okay.
I spent many hours on this website, and he does make some good points, so I am going to include it. His theory is that while Bo and Marty were the main killers in the situation, the killing itself was orchestrated and premeditated, and he believes Marilyn was the mastermind behind it all.
Really?
And it gets wilder that she was working with Sue's 14-year-old daughter, Sheila.
Well, Sheila did have a lot of resentment for her mother.
He speaks to many reasons that he believes Sheila wanted her family dead and that she is even perhaps a sociopath. She wanted to keep the baby she was pregnant with. Her mom took it away and she could not forgive her for that. Additionally, she resented her mother for forcing her to take care of all her siblings, and she felt trapped in Keddie. She confided in Marilyn about her feelings, and perhaps even she was the one who told Marilyn that Marty was having an affair with her mother, Sue. They then conspired to kill them off and make sure Marty and Bo were the ones taken down. So this is like the vengeful woman. Like, Marilyn knew she wanted to leave Marty. She asks him basically to kill on her behalf, which lines up with the letter he sent her where he said, I killed 4 people on your behalf. What more do you want from me? And this could be happening also while the DOJ cover-up is happening.
I mean, yes, because the whole point is that we don't know why Marty all of a sudden did this.
Yeah.
And of course, Sheila's not there that day, and Sheila's just going to church the next day, if that's the case.
And Sheila, from what I understand, and going down this rabbit hole, never had spent the night at the Seabolts ever before until this night.
Okay.
Tina had been spending the night there because her best friend was the Seabolt's daughter. But for whatever reason that night, Sheila went over and told Tina to go back to the cabin. She said her mom wanted her to do dishes or whatever.
Oh.
The other big piece to this theory is that there was a light outside of Cabin 28, and it was a switch that turned on not only Cabin 28's light, but also a big light that illuminated the entire space where you drove in.
Okay.
The people in Cabin 28 always left that light on because it was a very dark area if that main light wasn't on for all of the cabins. So it was just part of, if you lived in Cabin 28, you left that light on.
It was turned off.
The night of the murders, that light was not on. And we know that because when Kathy dropped off the boys, she said it was, she couldn't see her hand in front of her because it's so dark in this forested area. And so the speculation is that Sheila turned that light off knowing that the murders were going to happen. And she could have quickly done that while she was leaving the house to go spend the night at the Seabolts, and her mom wouldn't have noticed because it would have been at like 7 o'clock in the evening before it was dark or whatever.
But why the fuck would Marilyn send over her own 11-year-old son to go witness these murders?
So they do talk about that on this forum as well. And they mention that it's very possible Marilyn didn't even know her own son was spending the night there.
Because she was just as much of a whatever mom.
Well, that's the other thing is that I saw where she actually went to the bar with Marty and Bo.
Oh.
This one is hard for me because I've seen 2 different stories that one, Marty and Bo were there by themselves. But then another one was that she was there and she was wearing a sparkling evening gown while they were wearing suits and sunglasses.
Okay.
This was a hard episode to put together.
Yeah.
And so people believe Marilyn was involved because she also went to the bar with them in flashy attire. But they could have also convinced her to just come out with them and been like, we're going to do this and you should wear a fancy gown.
Yeah.
And then they think when they all left, she went back home and went to bed. And then they went across to the cabin to do the murders.
Okay, so I will say one thing because I know nothing about the story. I knew nothing about the story, really. I've never heard any part of it. When you started the story and told me what happened and I knew that Sheila survived, my brain actually immediately went to her being involved as the oldest daughter.
Yeah.
So I kind of had that in the back of my head this entire time. So like, I can't say that this isn't something that happened.
I know.
I mean, like I said, there was a lot of emotion there, a lot of resentment.
Yes.
So, but what's fucked up is her doing the whole, if they did do this and they were involved, just the two of them just for the rest of their lives pretending that, oh my God,
fine.
and
I know.
you know, blah, blah, blah.
And Sheila actually did a big story with people.com. And I think she was actually in the magazine. I didn't write this down, but it was in the last 5 years. And DMAC mentions this about Sheila. And he said that she did that for publicity to sound like she was so sad and all of that. But he grew up in the area and he said Sheila's a sociopath. And that she hated her mom.
Yeah.
He believes she is the main mastermind behind it and she pulled Marilyn in. He also believes that she could have potentially been working with the Meeks because they were upset about the baby as well.
Yeah.
And not that any of them may have been directly involved in murdering Sue, but may have helped on the other side.
Right.
That's why, you know, when you hear the sheriff and Mike say 6 people, I think they are exploring all of these avenues.
Right.
And I do know that Mike Gamberg specifically is working with DMAC.
Okay. And that, you know, lends him some validity in all of this.
And DMAC does say that they don't agree on everything. So it's worth bringing up.
They're actually all local.
And they know these people. They grew up with them. They would know a little bit more about it. They're also the ones that believe Sheila was a working girl and was trying to make money to get out. There's a lot to this theory. Wow. I can't go into it all. It's actually what derailed me on this episode when I was writing it, was coming across this whole other path.
Oh, okay.
And having to research it and tie it all back in.
Okay.
But I would say if you want to learn more about that side of the story, and probably the most details I saw for the case was on cabin28.com. There's a lot of opinions on there and people who think that DMAC is a
crazy
crackpot
or something. Yeah.
But he actually does have whole forums set up where he invites podcasters to come and learn the details of the story.
Oh, okay.
So I did. So thank you. If you listen, you might, because you're very invested in Keddie Cabin. Hope I explained that well.
Wow.
So that's everything I have. And I believe wholeheartedly that Marty and Bo are definitely involved, and Marty was the main one that killed Sue. For whatever reason, we may never know. He's dead. She's dead.
Yep.
I think he went in specifically for revenge against Sue, maybe not even to murder her, maybe just to scare her, and emotions got the best of him. He also did state, I think I didn't write this down somewhere, in one of his interviews later when he confessed to the therapist, she asked him about the little girl, because I think he went through the whole scenario with this therapist, and she said, what about the little girl? What happened with her? And he said he had to incapacitate her. So I think that fits into what you said, where she walked out and saw him maybe just torturing her mom.
Yeah, something.
She screamed and he told one of the guys that was with him to get her the fuck out of there.
Yeah, exactly.
And they put her in a car or whatever and then took her somewhere.
Yep.
Because they couldn't bring themselves to kill her.
Yes. That's what I thought about immediately, is she wasn't supposed to be part of it. Teenage boys who are fighting back and all of that. And maybe they are involved in drug stuff too. And, you know, that part coming into it because they know who he is and all this, whatever, whoever was involved. They were tying things together too. They couldn't be left to say anything, and neither could the girl, but they couldn't bring themselves to kill the girl. 2 teenage boys they kind of look at as men.
So we don't know what happened to Tina. I hope it was quick and easy. I hope they didn't
I hope
torture
so too.
her. I don't know, but they took her out to some campsite. And
okay. I mean, I would be curious to see her the autopsy report. Obviously, she was just bones, but whatever was brought from that, if she had any marks on any of her bones, or hopefully
they could have just dropped her out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. My guess is that she may have been, if she wasn't murdered in the way that her family was, they probably suffocated her or something. Mm-hmm. I hope she was not sexually assaulted.
I hope not.
They didn't know what to do with her, and she had to be handled.
This is one of those things where you can go in many different ways.
Yes.
And figure it out. And that's what we're doing. We're just spitballing here. But something happened and Marty and Bo were involved.
Yep.
And maybe others. But despite all the time that has passed, we are now at 45 years. Authorities are still hopeful that this case will be solved. We have Mike and Sheriff and DMAC working on it.
I think they will. I think they know a lot. Yeah.
I did see one interview with Dana's father. So I told you we didn't know much about Dana.
Okay.
His father did come forward when they did the People magazine. Somehow they found him, and his name is Gary Wingate. And he said, "Nobody has the faintest idea of who killed my son. So I long ago had to let this thing go or it would have eaten me alive. I don't think about it. I don't go to that ghost town, and I have no idea if ghosts exist there. But I do know this. There is evil in this world, and evil was in that house that night."
Yes, it was.
So Sheila is still out there, and she did do the interview with People magazine, and she said, "I don't think there really is any type of final closure in a murder case. We still have to live on without our loved ones." And she said that she hopes that the case will one day be definitively solved.
Alrighty, well, crazy story.
I don't know where to end other than that. It's just, we don't know. And we hope they're going to find out. As you can tell just from me telling the story, there's so much complexity to this and to every story that we ever researched for this podcast.
This is just, it's one of those, it's a small town, but there were some big fish involved. I feel like I've seen 30 TV series like this.
It feels like a movie. Yeah. Like Ozark or... Because didn't Ozark involve organized crime?
I didn't watch the whole Ozark thing, but I've seen a lot of stuff like this, and it is this complex because there's multiple people, multiple layers of government and crime and drugs and just the local people who stick their nose into everything, and it can be that complicated.
And I think the fact that both Bo and Marty died early means that guilt may have been eating them alive. I'm not real sure. I couldn't find their exact causes of death.
Yeah.
Or maybe karma, or with Bo, I wonder if something else happened. Because they died just 7 years later.
They were both involved in dangerous lifestyles, regardless of what Bo was doing.
True.
Marty too. And for all we know, the reason it got so crazy that night was because Marty was high at the same time.
That's very possible.
Yeah.
That's maybe why they were wearing suits and sunglasses, because they had been like doing drugs all day.
Yeah.
I don't know. There is this other guy out there, D. Lake, that the psychic found. I could not find anything on him. I looked and looked. I was hoping to find something about this guy. There were a few things mentioned in some of the forums on cabin28.com that there is a local guy whose first name was D, D-E-E. But I couldn't find the last name Lake. I couldn't. Or
maybe it's not a guy and she misinterpreted him and he's saying to go look in a lake.
Maybe. Psychics don't get everything right.
No. Well, it was another really good who done it, but I think we know who done it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of obvious.
It's just a lot more people involved that maybe we don't even know who their names are.
Yeah.
I really hate saying that I enjoyed it, but it was a really good one. And
I love when we can have a lot of discussions.
I know, me too.
In the cases.
And we did have to stall this one for a week because she's like, crap, I just found more. So
we always want to show as many sides as we can, which is our downfall sometimes.
It is.
And it's why we had to take a break last week.
Yeah. Part of the reason. Yeah. Part of the reason.
Because we don't want to just put a half-ass.
No.
Especially when it's a true crime. If it's something like paranormal or anything like that, we can piece it together. But when we do our true crime, you guys wouldn't believe how much time we spend on this
Especially if it's unsolved.
Exactly.
Especially if it's, we know who did it. That's very different. We know who was like actually
arrested.
Charged with the crime and all of that. That's very different. But
even some of those have some
because
things too.
Were they actually guilty? You know, it just depends on the story. But yeah, I really liked this one. And I do feel so bad for Sue and Dana, John and Tina, and they just seem to be the unfortunate culmination of a bunch of shit that was going on in that town.
I know. And they already had probably some pretty unfortunate lives. They were living in poverty. Mm-hmm. It sounds like her son was trying to make ends meet, selling some drugs or stealing. I don't know what was going on with Tina.
Yeah.
Poor girl.
And Dana.
Yeah. I didn't find much about the boys. So Rick and Greg survived.
Okay.
I'm not sure what happened to them, like where they went after. There wasn't a lot of focus on that. Sheila is focused on because she's done interviews, but I think they just wanted to probably be left alone.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot out there about
it was
them.
A traumatic experience for them. They were in the house when it happened.
Mm-hmm. And they were so young.
You know, they don't need to be in the story anymore.
No.
But well, thank you for your hard work on it. And hopefully the guys working on it, we do hear what ultimately is, you know, what they're going to move forward with as far as a charge goes once that's done in a few years.
Yeah. And I'll keep following the case. And if we hear anything, we'll bring it up on our podcast and let you guys know.
Yep. Alrighty, everybody. Thank you for listening. Please come back next week for another true crime because now we're back in it.
We know you guys like it.
Please send in your lab reports, any suggestions to lucidlabpodcast@gmail.com.
And you can find us in the meantime between episodes on social media. We are on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook, all at Lucid Lab Podcast, one word. Hopefully TikTok is still around right now.
Have a great week.
We'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye. Oh, yeah. And in the meantime,
don't forget to stay lucid.
Bye.